Well, hello everybody. It's Glenn Depke from Depke Wellness, and welcome to the Dr. Chi After Party. This is where we're going to review basically the fingernail and tongue assessment that most of you have either seen Dr. Chi or you were at the lecture last Thursday and actually perhaps have questions about the lecture. But this is really an interactive Q&A, because and it's basically about what is your body telling you. But the reason why this is so important is because with Dr. Chi, for everybody who's seen him, you have a 10-minute session. He's a master at what he does. I've been trained by Dr. Chi back in 2001 and had a follow-up training actually just last year. And while I might know what he knows, there's no way I could do it in 10 minutes. The guy is just a master at what he does, except the 10-minute appointment really leaves a lot to be said because you don't have a lot of time for questions, question and answer. You really don't get the deeper information. You just basically get an understanding of what your body's telling you. Then you get directions on what supplements to take to address that. And this a simple fact for most people, in a perfect world, we would just take all his recommendations, follow for the durations that he suggests. But it's not real for a lot of people to be able to take all the supplements for all the durations that he has suggested through the whole time. And so we're also going to work on really clearing up and providing really some priorities today. We're going to show some slides that will actually tie into some of the more common challenges that Dr. Chi sees with people. And we're going to have a little bit of fun with it too, because I'm going to ask you guys to really be telling me what you think it means. So this will be very interactive. And then also we're going to talk about some of the testing. Most people that have had the session with Dr. Chi, as an example, if there were some deep challenges with the lack of the moons, the poor circulation, and a potential cardiovascular issues, he would make a recommendation to maybe check CRP or check homocysteine. If he thought that estrogen dominance was an issue, he would ask to make sure that your E1 and E2 isn't greater than your E3. And honestly, when he says that, most people don't even know what he means by E1, E2, or E3, right? And to me, the other thing that we want to define today is that some of the things you look at that he can see could have multiple meanings. And Dr. Chi will then make a generalization based on what is the typical problem. So instead of a generalization, how I use this with the clients in my center is that I'm going to use it to see, well, what is it telling me? So now what do we need to test to confirm that? And we'll see that pretty quickly going into. So if you have a person who has cherry angiomas on their body, plus the white specks on the nails, plus what's showing up under the tongue tied into liver and heavy metals, you still can't define that it's an absolute estrogen dominance. Because there's too many possibilities here, and it could also be both. So where I said earlier that you don't want to use Mymin for a year when you don't have estrogen dominance, well, you also don't want to ignore liver congestion if you're only focusing on the Mymin, okay? So and this is to me, one of the most fascinating tests that can be done. And it does test in a few different levels, but I'm really more focused on understanding the liver a little bit deeper here. But there's a test by a company called Genova, and it's called the Comprehensive Organics Profile. And what I love about the organics profile is it actually defines both a phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification pathways. So if anything is off within those pathways, it'll show up on that test. So it is a liver congestion, but it shows so much more though than just that. From going from the top down, functional vitamin and mineral analysis. So if there's a speck on the nail, perhaps you're going to see some mineral deficiencies in this test. The amino acid insufficiencies like carnitine or NAC, and that goes much further than that. The oxidative damage and need for antioxidants is also part of this. We talked about the phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification capacity. It also looks at B vitamins, from your body's utilization of B vitamins, which is essential for your nervous system, and neurotransmitter metabolites, so basically neurotransmitter function, mitochondria energy production, methylation, as we were just talking about earlier, sufficiency. It also looks at lipoic acid, CoQ10, and also from a dysbiosis, it looks at bacteria and fungus and yeast markers. And so that's one of the tests. If you're really thinking that liver congestion is an issue, that not only really gives you a comprehensive answer to liver congestion, but it also looks at so many other important factors. And that's just always an enjoyable test to go over with clients.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. Yeah, at any point during this.
I think it was Genova Nutri-Eval.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between the two? Is one more comprehensive than the other?
This is, last I've known, this is their most comprehensive test.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So that one was like pretty big too.
Yeah, there's a lot, and I think some of the different markers, I think that's more nutritionally derived and this is more functionality and system derived test.
Okay.
So that's a big difference.
You may want to repeat the question for.
Oh, and the question was, which test was it that you did?
I did the Nutri-Eval.
Okay, the
Genova.
Nutri-Eval with Genova. She was wondering what the difference between that and the organics profile was. So, now next, and this is such a big one. When we're talking about circulation and the lack of the moons, and it's so funny because I remember years ago. I had, and it was back when I was living in Chicago, and I had a client come in. It was an African American gentleman, and he didn't have any moons on his fingers. And I was explaining to him, the challenges that could potentially cause. And he just looked at me with a very serious face. And I'm just going to repeat exactly how he said it. He says, black people have no moons. I was trying to help him understand that no, everybody has moons, regardless of what race we are, color our skin is. And he went on that he was actually using the Bane light even back in those days. I was doing that. And months later, he came back in for one of his follow-ups, and he was all smiles, and he was just showing off his moons. And this is such a high priority. Like even today, seeing clients, I had a new client who had sufficient deficiencies in the moons. There were no moons on any fingers and very small moons on the thumbs, and this is somebody who has a neurological disorder. So I was just explaining, well, think of this. Think of when you're lacking the moons, you're lacking peripheral circulation, which means you're not pushing blood to the extremities of the body into smaller capillaries. And how most people feel that is they'll have cold hands or feet, or maybe numbness or tingling in their hands or feet. And then I'll always ask, well, where's your other extremity? If you think of your feet and your hands, where the other extremity is your head. And that's the big challenge, is we don't want to have a lack of proper circulation to the extremities of our brain, to the smaller capillaries, because what that means is that the brain is actually going to be deficient also in oxygen, in nutrients, really the blood is how hormones travel as communicators in our body, and actually even a lack of being able to take waste away. When I see the lack of the moons in any new client that comes into my office, that is one of the high priorities, because anything else that we would ever do together is based on the blood moving through the body. It's how you get nutrients around, it's how you move oxygen. It's just basically how everything is going to happen. Now, from risk factors, it's let me get in one other thing before risk factors, just to clarify something, because this is a misconception that most people will think when Dr. Chi had told them that they have a lack of moons, because the way we've been trained to think as far as circulation is concerned and exercise, the first thing that people think is that, oh, I just need to kick up my cardiovascular activity, if I have a lack of circulation. This is what I thought. Yeah, right, yeah. Somebody here was thinking the same thing when it was brought up. It's not a cardiovascular issue. The regulatory factor for circulation in your body is your brain. And so it's a brain issue. And so now here's the catch-22 of this. You have a lack of circulation that creates a brain issue, right? Because you're not getting oxygen and nutrients to the brain. And then the brain issue creates a worsening in the peripheral circulation. So you get caught in this really kind of unhealthy cycle, where you have this feeding off of each other. So that's a huge impact in changing anything, and actually also becomes a significant risk factor for anything tied into the brain. It's a risk factor for your cardiovascular system. It's another risk factor for stroke. And the one area that, and this is something that Dr. Chi enlightened me on just over the last couple of years, is when you're missing a significant amount of moons. So if you only have like a small moon on your thumb or no moons, that is a big risk factor for cancer. And so and that's due to the fact that the body doesn't have proper circulation in any given area, the body is always doing everything it can to balance. Right? So if your body is lacking circulation somewhere that is a high level of importance, you will create an angiogenesis effect where your body just like floods that area with circulation, with blood vessels to actually bring some circulation back to an area that's been lacking for some time. And angiogenesis is typically what's going to feed and create a cancerous issue in the body. Because we'll have tumors, we'll have cancer cells, but they don't grow into these big malignant challenges until they get a significant blood supply. It's just like, as an example, looking at, we'll usually once a year, sometimes more, we have somebody come in and do thermography, and they'll do either whole body thermography or breast thermography. And I can remember one client in particular where the breast tissue was just, red with heat. And it actually from that person was actually estrogen. It was an estrogen dominance in the breast tissue. It was a woman who was on the pill. So that's a big risk factor for breast cancer just from that. But then I've seen other thermography results where you can see the red or even the white hot readings on the thermography that shows a significant increase in blood flow right to that area. So when you have a significant increase in blood flow to any one area, that's just asking for cancer to be an issue. So those are some of the reasons why it's such a high priority to make sure that your circulation is optimal. And from a personal perspective, I've got it, because this is another level why this is important. I've got a family history of significant neurodegeneration. I had a grandmother who passed with severe dementia. I had a mother who passed with severe dementia, and I had a brother who passed with ALS. And I used to be epileptic. I used to have a seizure disorder. So there's a lot of neurodegeneration in my family. So for my sake, or for people who have that type of history in their family, I use vein light all the time regardless of what my moons look like. Because I want to make sure that I'm consistently getting blood and oxygen and nutrients in my brain, because I am going to maintain the rest of my life with a healthy brain rather than a degenerative brain. So those are all factors that tie into the moons and the circulation. So this is a picture that's going to tie into insulin resistance. Does anybody know what factor we're looking at? And it's not, and I'll give you a little hint, it's not where the arrow is pointing.
Is it little red dots?
No, the red dots on the tongue would tie into hormonal imbalance and often estrogen dominance.
It's the ridges on the outside.
Right. Yeah, it's the teeth marks on the outside of the tongue. So when you see the teeth marks on the outside of the tongue, that's where Dr. Chi is going to go into the challenges with the insulin resistance. And often he's going to recommend Diabend in this level. He's typically going to team that up with the Myamin, because if there's an estrogen issue, that also is a leading factor into insulin resistance and developing a diabetic condition. But one thing to recognize with this, like this tongue right here, these are pretty mild scallops. I refer to them as scallops, but most people call them teeth marks. When they become much deeper, it could be a severe and chronic issue with your kidneys. So it's not always just insulin resistance. When they're really deep, it could be a much deeper issue from a kidney factor. And then when you start to look at the kidney factors, it kind of leads you back to what we were talking about earlier, tied into toxicity in the body, and why is the kidney actually being overwhelmed at the level that it is. Now looking at this tongue, beside for the teeth marks on the outside tied in insulin resistance, does anybody want to tell me what would the arrows in the middle, or the markings in the middle where arrows pointing into, would actually tie into? Yeah, perfect, right. So that's digestion. Yeah, so the mid portion of the tongue, like from about where the shadow is on the tongue in this picture, moving forward is the stomach, and then just in front of that is the small intestine. So this is mostly in the stomach, and just a little bit moving into the small intestine. So that's somebody with a deeper, longer-term chronic issue with their stomach, basically. Yeah, so you start to learn so much more than just one thing when you're looking at this.
What? Can I ask really quick? My husband asked me this question when
Yes.
we left. on Saturday, and I didn't have a good answer of what is insulin resistance.
Make sure you repeat the question.
So the question was, what is insulin resistance, basically? Okay. So insulin resistance is, you think about this, is when we eat a food, and I'm just use food as an example. We eat a food, and that has a certain level of glucose that it's going to release into the blood. Right now, what happens with that glucose? Some will be used up and burnt as energy, and then the other aspects of that glucose needs to be removed from the blood, because if the glucose is too high or too low, both of those will have a negative impact on the brain function. So whether we're hyper or hyperglycemic. So the job of insulin is produced in the pancreas, and then the insulin is released in the blood. It goes and grabs the glucose, and it brings it into a cell in the body. Right now, the challenge though with this is that when we've been either over consuming or really even just releasing, and I'll explain that also. We can be releasing it due to stress also. But when there's too much glucose in the blood for too long of a chronic period of time, the cells become full of glucose. And now it's almost like there's a gatekeeper at the cell wall saying, oh, no insulin in here. We don't have any more room for glucose. So and then what happens with that is then the glucose remains in the bloodstream, which then creates brain issues. And because the glucose is still in there, now the pancreas is still producing more and more insulin.
Going into your blood.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the challenges with that too is that when insulin is high, insulin is a trigger for the overproduction of aromatase I mentioned earlier. So that can lead into the conversion of testosterone into estrogen. And also when the insulin is high, that's what also drives up triglycerides and makes us store body fat. Yeah, so all of these factors really tie into that. And this is where some of this testing comes up. And a great question, by the way, that's helpful. Oh, and I'll bring up the one other area tied into the insulin. It's not only just what we eat. I want everybody to understand that, because everybody, there's a lot of people who are almost demeaned by conventional thoughts and nutrition, where somebody who is a diabetic and they have high glucose and high insulin, and you might have somebody, as I said, almost demeaning them. If you would just eat right, everything would be okay. If you eat right and exercise, but you know what? It's not always about eating right and exercising. And as an example, I had one of my worst clients over the years that was a diabetic. Before I ever saw him the first time, he had already lost his eyesight. He already lost one limb. The gentleman was on tens of thousands of dollars of medications it was tens of thousands of dollars every month. And what was interesting is, we cleaned up his diet. We got him off of the food sensitivities. Believe it or not, we had to address that he was drinking soda and he thought it was okay. And so many, it's like simple factors. But the long term of this, the gentleman was able to get because his blood glucose levels were normally anywhere between 250 and 450. Right? We got him down to about 115, 110, which was really a little bit comical from the perspective of the endocrinologist. Had no clue what to do with this guy, because you don't see somebody who's already lost their eyesight and their legs or a leg, and they have these really high, and he's been on he's on insulin shots and all of this. You don't see people like that get better. So they really didn't know what to do, which was kind of interesting to kind of watch them scurry and figure out what to do with the gentleman. But ultimately, even though everything had improved, if he would have a lot of stress on any given day, he could be sitting there at 110 and shoot up to 250. Because of the stress. See, that's one of the things that most people don't think about with glucose and insulin. It's not just what you eat. It's not because you're lazy and you eat poorly. And it's really just a bad tag. And some people it is, but for a lot of people it's not. But they just might have so much stress in their life. And think about the fight or flight response, where your body actually your body will actually break into stored glycogen in the body and flood the body with glucose to help you fight or flee. But most of our stress responses have nothing to do with life or death. We're not fighting people and running from people, and hopefully nobody ever has to do that. But our stress is usually just more perceived mental, emotional stress. So we're not burning off that glucose, and it just creates a whole nother cycle. So that's another issue that would tie into that. So now different testing with these different levels. Now some of this is going to tie into the lack of the immunes and the potential risk factors for stroke or heart disease. and some will tie in, even in some into inflammation in the body, and then obviously as we're talking about glucose and insulin. And so when I'm looking at, when somebody really wants a test to confirm if they have an inflammatory issue, I usually recommend the combination of homocysteine, C-reactive protein, and A1C. Right now, because when you just look at one, it often, I can't tell you how many times I've seen just one of those markers come back and they look fine, yet the person is so obviously inflamed. So you want to look at a combination of markers. And the one thing that when I say this, a lot of people are thinking, well, what do you mean A1C and inflammation? Because isn't that more of a blood sugar marker for diabetes? And it is, because the A1C I positioned in the middle because it goes with either the two on the top or the bottom. Most people recommend an A1C to get more of a long-term effect and look at blood sugar, but the A1C is a fantastic inflammatory marker also. And then when you combine it with that below, it helps you understand what's going on from the blood sugar. And I'm glad you asked about insulin before, because insulin is to me the biggest missing factor on almost every blood test, because it's every blood test they'll test for fasting blood sugar, and that's normal. And now it's becoming a little bit more normal for doctors to test A1C, but you still never see insulin. And see, to me, that's the missing marker, because the A1C could also be showing inflammation, not necessarily blood sugar. And let's say the glucose level comes back and it's 98, which, like, to me, working with my clients, I would say that that's still outside of the optimal. We need to work on lowering that. But if you get a level of 98 in conventional medicine, you're fine. And there's nothing to really worry about or look at. But when you don't look at insulin, it really doesn't give you the information, because here's the big difference. You could have somebody with a glucose level of 98 with an insulin level of 4. So they're not really producing a lot of insulin to maintain a slightly elevated glucose level. That might be a very simple, digest or nutritional change or something tied into stress that person would deal with. But what if somebody has a glucose level of 98 and an insulin level of 15 to maintain that? Now we know that person is already in insulin resistance, because they're producing way too much insulin to maintain already a slightly elevated glucose level. And so if you are looking at the potential of diabetes or insulin resistance or anything on that level, you want to look also, and I would even say, if you were just going to want to do the most basic thing, look at glucose and insulin. The A1C is still helpful, and it can still give you other markers. But if you're looking at this across the board, from a blood sugar perspective, from an inflammatory perspective, from heart and a cardiovascular issue and a stroke issue, you look at all of these. These are really great tests to actually utilize to actually uncover some of those issues for you. Go back, and I'll just get back to this again, just so we kept the right train of thought. So remember that the crack down the middle of the tongue is going through the small intestines and the stomach on this gentleman. As I mentioned, he likely also has some pretty deep colon issues that just doesn't appear in this picture. You want to know what it is, because I totally support Digestron. It's a great supplement. I use it on a regular basis with my clients, as well as the use of things like a pre-probiotic and a digestive enzyme, and sometimes even stomach acid for people who have really tough time breaking down protein. But it's just like we were talking about with everything else. You want to get to the bottom of the issue. Does this person have a gluten issue? Do they have a gluten-associated cross-reactive issue? So is their body's immune system dysregulated to the point where they already have a gluten sensitivity, but now their immune system is attacking similar proteins. So proteins that are similar in structure to gluten, and they're attacking them in the body in the same way. Or maybe more comprehensive as far as the amount of food you're looking at, like a blood print 154 that looks at the immune system reaction to 154 different foods. But even from a perspective of how I would use that in our center with my clients is that, if somebody did a blood print 154 and it shows up they have 50 foods they can't eat, it's not about eliminating 50 foods. If somebody can't handle 50 foods from an immune system perspective, it's not a food issue. It's a digestive issue, and it's the digestive issue that's actually feeding the immune system issue. And one easy thing, and I'm sorry for those who are watching listening to the replay, you won't be able to see my visual of this, but some of the newest research from a food sensitivity perspective that has got me really, it's I just have a whole nother level of excitement with food sensitivity with the newest research, and it's interesting, and I consider myself one of the experts in food sensitivity in our country or world, however you want to say it. And out of all of the experts that are out there, and there's just maybe like 10 that I would consider that, I only know of 2 who are talking about this. It's myself and a gentleman called Dr. Karazi, who is just an amazing encyclopedia about health in himself. But the newest research shows that the food sensitivity at the core is an inability to break down protein properly. And if you and I'm going to use an example. So this is what those watching the replay, you can't see what I'm doing with my hands. So I'll try to explain it also. So if we say that my hands clasped together as an egg, okay, and an egg has over 20 amino acids, but I only have 10 fingers, so we're going to go with an egg has 10 amino acids today. Do you know how exactly? All right, I know it's over 20. I think it's 22, but I can't remember. But anyway, so my 2 hands clasped together is an egg, and you're going to eat this egg. And if you break the protein down properly, and I spread out all 10 of my fingers and spread them all out, a properly broken down egg would then become 10 single amino acids, as you can visualize if you're watching replay that I have my hands spread all the way. An immune system antigen cannot attach to a single amino acid. Right now, if you take that same egg and you have poor protein breakdown, and instead of 10 single amino acids, you actually have 2 amino acid chains. So now I'm holding out both hands with my fingers all held together. The amino acid change is what the immune system can actually attach an antigen to. So the big problem is that people just aren't breaking down their protein, and now the immune system can attach to those chains, whereas it couldn't attach to the single amino acids. Yeah. So and then the problem with this is because and if we think about it, like, food sensitivity is a relatively new thought and idea in healthcare. It really is, and there's still, what I believe is there's still so little known about it. So that's why I love to get this research like this. So let's say you did a blood print 154, and you take away 50 foods, and out of 154 foods, 50 of them you don't like. Now 50 have been taken away. Now you're left with 54, and maybe out of those, only 10 of them are readily available. So you're limited to, like, you're eating like 8 or 10 foods on a consistent basis. The less diverse your nutritional plan is, the worse your microbiome is. So now you're caught in this quandary.
Explain what a microbiome is.
Microbiome is the deeper levels of bacteria in your gastrointestinal system that is essential for the proper workings of your digestive system. And so,
the new research shows your brain too.
Right. Well, yeah, actually,
right to your brain.
Yeah, you can never separate the gut and the brain. It's always one system. What goes on when one is going on in the other on some level. Yeah. So the challenge with that is now you have some practitioners saying, oh, well, eliminate all these 50 foods because your immune system is reacting to it. But again, like I said before, it's not an immune issue, and but it's really just tied into a digestive issue, which really needs to be corrected. And usually at that level of challenge, there's usually a digestive issue that needs to be corrected. So helping that person break down protein. There's usually inflammatory issues that they're dealing with. So there's other things that are usually going around it, but all of that can actually be addressed. So that's an important factor. And then also, again, getting to the depth of what it is. So one of the things that I do on a consistent basis with clients is the pathogen stool testing. If you're living with a pathogen, if you have a parasite or a protozoa or an amoeba or an entamoeba or a detrimental bacteria or an H. pylori infection, and the list just goes on and on and on, and you're living with that, you want to know. You don't want to be thinking, oh, I'm just going to take digesterone and GI and my crack in my tongue is going to go away. You want to get to the bottom of what it is, because if it's a pathogen, and really when I used to, I don't do this anymore just because it's just way too time consuming in a client session. But when I used to actually work with those and go over, review their stool collection kit, we would try to go back and figure out when they got the pathogen. Because it's usually a telltale sign. Usually you go somewhere and you actually have chronic diarrhea. Maybe you vomited. You had some chronic diarrhea for like a 2 or 3 day period, and typically somebody would give you something like Imodium to kind of plug you up, right? And then the diarrhea stops, And then the body just, again, your body's always trying to balance. So your body will actually do what it can to maintain the best of health, even if you still have a pathogen. But the average time frame that people have been living with a pathogen before they have it assessed because it's affecting their health is about 11 years. So it's like 11 years with, like, as an example, Cryptosporidium, which is a protozoal parasite that lives in interior lining of your small intestines that just very simply over time will shut down function of your body. I would rather know that soon after I had it rather than 11 years. Like even myself, my wife will probably laugh about it, but she's seen me do stool tests many times, even if I don't think there's a big issue, because it's just good to do one every now and then, because I would rather know than wait. I don't want to wait for the 11 years. Now, the other challenge, though, the last one on the list here, though, is SIBO testing, which stands for, those who don't know, it stands for small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. And this is becoming a bigger issue. And what's interesting about this, it's also, believe it or not, when you get to the depth of SIBO, it's a brain issue again. Remember I was talking earlier about the regulatory factor for circulation of your body is your brain? Well, the regulatory factor for motility of your colon, so movement of your colon, so how many times you're going to have a bowel movement, is actually your brain. So if there's a brain issue, that's actually creating a dysregulation of motility, and you're constipated, and then the constipation is what leads to SIBO, because when you constipate the colon, there's going to be basically it's going to create a faulty function of the ileocecal valve that should be keeping the contents of your colon in your colon. But when that valve becomes faulty, now what's going to happen is the bacteria that's in your colon moves into your small intestines. And the issue with that is really, it's not just that, it's not about the bacteria itself, it's about the way that particular bacteria is different from the colon to the small intestines. And don't quote me exactly on the numbers, but if I remember correctly, the bacteria in your colon is to the 10th power, and the bacteria is the same bacteria in your small intestine, but to the 4th power. So when you move that bacteria to the 10th power into the small intestine, it now disrupts absorption, assimilation. You can eat any random foods that would potentially trigger a SIBO reaction, and you're bloated and uncomfortable and you have a lot of pain. And some of the challenges with that, if SIBO is an issue, that's a point where you have to be really careful with diet, because it's a very restrictive diet when you're on SIBO. So in order to still create a diversity, you eat the SIBO diet, but you have to rotate as many foods as possible so you don't create the imbalance in the microbiome. So you kind of see how this is not as easy as just, here, take your digestion and your GI sheet. Because ultimately you want to get to the bottom of it. And it doesn't mean, and like as an example, the GI Chi is helpful for SIBO and can be helpful for some pathogens, but not all. Like the GI Chi is something that I'll use with some clients that have detrimental bacteria, but it's not getting rid of a protozoa. It's not getting rid of a parasite. It's not getting rid of necessarily an H. pylori infection. So yes.
I have a question about like pathogens as far as preventing. So like if you go out of the country, you can take some of the products with you if you get sick, and that will prevent it from staying in there?
Yes, good question. So the question is that if you're going out of the country and you're traveling, can you take some products with to make sure that the pathogen doesn't remain an issue? And absolutely. One of the things that usually when I vacation, I take a little bit of a vacation from my supplements also. I'll take the supplements that I feel are essential for me, but I'm not going to take everything I would normally take. But I always have with me my probiotics. I always have my enzymes. I usually take something called Luvos, which actually helps to attach to any pathogen and pull it out of the body. And even things like the GI Chi or the Digesteron, if you're going to be somewhere where you're going to be more apt to pick up a pathogen, which honestly, it doesn't even have to be vacation anymore. We can pick it up at the restaurant down the street. We can even pick it up in our own homes. So, and it's really not that difficult to pick up. But the key factor is if you have a strong adrenal function, strong function of the whole gut-brain immune connection, strong, just really strong immunity. When you're exposed to a pathogen, your body just takes care of it. It just destroys it, and you move on. So that's another big factor. But the testing, if you have the cracks in the middle of the tongue, look at what's causing it. That's just the big point with it. And The next one is important. This is where feel free to get in any questions. The next subject with this is tied into basically prioritizing your supplements. So as I mentioned earlier, in the perfect world, if whatever Dr. Chi recommended to you, you would just take for whether he said 6 months or 3 months or a year or some people for 2 years. And you would also get the testing done to confirm that you really do need to take that, whether or not that's the case. But the reality is there's some people who walked out with from the Dr. Chi session the other day who, between a couple spent like $900 in supplements. That wasn't even going to last them a full month for some of the supplements, right? So now most people that's not realistic. For some people it is, but for most it's not. So that's where it's important to create the priorities. And the priorities, when you're looking at your Dr. Chi sheet, the priorities number one are the areas that he has the longest length of time. If you have something that he says to take for 3 months as compared to something he says to take for 2 years, your priority would be in the 2 years. And then you also look at, and then also the other way to create the priorities is with the testing. As an example, if you do the 205E plus estrone and you find you don't have estrogen dominance, why would you take Mymin over the next year? That's not really a priority. The Mymin wouldn't hurt you if you're taking it and you don't have it, because it still has many benefits in the body hormonally and with cysts or growths in the body. It's a really fantastic supplement, but it wouldn't be a priority at that point. So why would you use it? And you want to also think of, as an example, another example. I had somebody who I had a couple people who were really kind of taken back by the price of AngioStop. I don't know if anybody that's here live was recommended AngioStop, but it's $200 a bottle. And depending on, now AngioStop is something I would recommend also. If I had a client came in and they went to their conventional doctor and they were diagnosed with cancer, I would recommend AngioStop, hands down. And it's an anti-angiogenesis. So it would actually help block that supply of blood flow that would be feeding a cancerous tumor. So that would be a high priority. But if you've been recommended to take AngioStop because you have a risk factor for cancer, because of you're missing the moons on all of your fingers, or you only have a small moon on your nail, sometimes it's hard to swallow a $200 bottle capsule for a risk factor. And I get it. We're typically driven by something we have rather than something we don't. So to me, what's the priority there? Is the priority to spend $200 on one bottle of AngioStop, or is the priority in improving your peripheral circulation with the vein light and the oxypower to help with getting more oxygen to your brain? To me, I would say that that's more realistic. And again, optimally, we would just do everything that he said and do all the testing, but we have to be realistic with it. So, and across the board, once you do the testing, because this came up in a session today where somebody was recommended Mymin, but we did the adrenal testing and the estrogen was fine. So I said, after that bottle of Mymin, you don't have to do that. And that same person was recommended Diaben, which is great if you have insulin resistance and blood sugar issues. Except if we're already working on the adrenals, and the adrenals have a very intimate connection with the pancreas, and you're really, by helping the adrenals, you're helping the pancreas, well, that takes a little bit of the priority of Diaben away. So it's now for the person who is just going to come see Dr. Chi, and they're going to use those supplements to help shift them from point A to point B, well, great. Well, then do that. But if you're looking deeper and you're working on different systems of the body, it's not that everything needs to be taken on a consistent basis. And the priorities are potentially different also from one person to the next. But I say one of the bigger priorities that you'll ever see is going to be tied into the lack of the circulation. Other priorities are if there's a digestive issue. If you have a digestive issue, it's likely, not likely, it's 100% going to be tied into something deeper that you just don't know right now. So you'd want to address that, and it doesn't, and still, like things like digesterone and GI Chi can help you from point A to point B, and even using like probiotics and enzymes, which to me are essential for all of us, because we don't eat a lot of raw fermented foods anymore, and we don't eat a lot of raw food anyway. And I eat cooked food more often than raw myself, so that's why I take an enzyme. And so there's so many things tied into this, but I want at this point I want to open it up to those that are here, to share like what supplements that they were asked to take, and if that doesn't seem realistic, then what can you do and how do you create the priorities? And then anything that you share will also be helpful for the people who are listening to the recording of this. So anything that comes up will be beneficial.
I was wondering, we had a bunch of friends that tested as high estrogen,
Mm-hmm.
both men and women. What do you think is causing that or leading to that trend of high estrogen dominance?
Okay, so the question was, there's a lot of people that, men and women, that have been shown to have high estrogen, and why is that a challenge? And I think really mostly twofold. The one is, as I mentioned earlier, with the overproduction of aromatase, which is the enzyme that converts testosterone into estrogen, which is really tied into blood sugar issues, which is generally tied into either nutrition, exercise, or very often more than that, distress. Just the major high stress levels that we have in the culture we live in nowadays. And that's honestly, from just an overall health perspective, just to go off on a little tangent, which I like to do every now and then, is just stress is probably the biggest impact that's affecting everybody with everything that Dr. Chi sees. Now the other factor is all the xenon estrogens that are in our lives. So all the all the plastics. I think back. I feel fortunate that when I was growing up, I'm 51 right now. When I was growing up, we didn't have a microwave, and then we got a microwave, and it was like the greatest thing in the world because I could take this thing out of the freezer, flip the corner of it, and throw it in the microwave, and I can actually put it in there for a couple minutes, and I would have a meal. But that's just loaded with xenon estrogens. Like heating a plastic like that, or even you don't even necessarily have to heat it in a cooking process. Like you could just have one of those flimsy plastic bottles that most of us drink water out of when we buy bottled water. That think about it. It's not like they're all just sitting at this like pristine room temperature. They're sitting in warehouses that are really hot. They're in a truck that are driving in heat, and inside that truck might be 120 degrees. So those xenon estrogens are actually leaching into the water, and those are some really big issues. Just a few of those. So great question.
On that's a tangent, but like, is BPA free? Are you good, or do we have to be drinking out of glass?
Well, the BPA free is much better. Optimally, glass would be the best thing to use. It's
Or stainless steel.
yeah.
Oh.
But stainless steel that. So the question was, are the BPA-free glass that we drink water out of safe, or should we really be using glass, or I should say BPA-free plastic, or should we be using glass? And the answer to me is glass is always best, and then somebody else had mentioned stainless, which is actually another great option. But with the stainless, a great way to test your stainless is to have a magnet. The magnet should not stick to your stainless. If the magnet sticks to your stainless, it's got too much nickel in it, and nickel is another metal that can actually create issues in the body. So
Yeah, I noticed the taste with stainless steel mugs
Mhm.
where it actually will taste metallic.
mhm.
So it must seem like it's leaching something into that.
Yeah.
Like if you have a stainless steel coffee pot,
Mhm.
the coffee tastes metallic.
Yeah.
So I always try to avoid those because that would seem like that's leaching something as
Yeah.
well. That can't be good.
Yeah, and we're discussing the leaching of metal from different so-called stainless steel products, which probably have other metals in them. It's probably the metal that's being leached out. And nickel will have that definite metallic taste to it also.
And with chickens and stuff, our foods are pumped, cows and stuff are pumped with all those antibiotics and probiotics and hormones, and so that will also feed estrogen. And even if you buy organic all the time, go out to eat, I always wonder, where are they getting this from, And a lot of people eat out all the time. If they go out to lunch every day, if you work in an office, how much estrogen and stuff are you getting in these chickens and
Yeah, hormone use in conventional food is very high. Because it's and like as a businessman also, you understand that in business it's about making profit, but not at the expense of, literally not just hurting people, killing people, right? Because it's because if you can pump a cow with hormones and have that cow bring a much higher yield, well, that's great from a business perspective, but then what are we all getting? You know, and I forget what it was. Had read something recently about, I think it's a turkey, like how quick a turkey becomes this like full-grown turkey now, whereas it,
Weights or something. It's
yeah,
really
yeah,
minimal.
it's so changed because again they're pumped with hormones, you know. So it's just, and even like the turkeys that we all share on Thanksgiving, like a turkey that is really that shape can't even exist in the wild. They just can't even function.
A good
Yeah.
test is we saw an old picture, like an old cookbook, like from great grandma or whatever, grandma. And I think somebody posted on Facebook where it was like the turkey then and then the turkeys now, and it looks so different. Just yeah, it looked right.
So if you're getting like, what would that be, cage free or grass fed or organic, is that,
better, much better.
that's taking care of that issue, or there's still
Well,
an issue?
yeah, it's much better, but even when they say cage free, it doesn't mean like when we think of cage free as they're all like out wandering the pasture and picking up worms and grubs from. It can still be cage free, but they're all like still. You might shove 10,000 chickens in a warehouse where they can still barely walk around. But it's cage free.
Yeah.
And it could still be no hormones and no antibiotics, but really even in likely in that. If it was in that scenario and they didn't use antibiotics, most of their chickens would just die from illness. So, because it's not a healthy environment, it's not a good community. So there's a lot of different challenges with that.
Oh, and then with estrogen too, plugins, sprays like room cleansers, purifiers, all of the body care products, deodorants, lotions, your toothpaste, your shaving cream, all that stuff we layer on top of us. It has a lot of chemical in it. It messes up our hormones big time.
Yeah, there's a lot of estrogen mimickers out there too. So, and so other questions about your personal results?
Yeah, I found that, I went gung-ho, bought everything, which is very unlike me, to just jump in with both feet. And all of a sudden, my stomach just swelled up.
Mhm.
I mean, I just felt like I was bloating all over the place.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
That's a big missing piece of this because so the question was somebody who went gung-ho and bought all the supplements and just started taking the supplements at the level that Dr. Chi recommended, and she became very bloated. And when that happens, just for some, there's a certain percentage of people. It's a small percentage, but it's still worth noting that if you take the full dose, it just might be too much for your body. Because think about this: is everything that Dr. Chi is going to recommend, it most likely has a positive impact in a general direction toward health and balance. But for some people, if you push yourself too quick, that can have another effect. And some people just, the dosing is a generalized recommendation from Dr. Chi. Well, some people's dose, rather than, like you might have on your sheet that it says take 3 capsules twice per day, but your dose can really, maybe the most you could take is 1, 2 or 3 times per day. And when that happens, so if anybody listening to the replay, if you take your supplements and you notice any level of bloating or discomfort, I recommend to stop everything for at least a day. Make sure the bloating goes back down, and then start back up at a very low dose, 1 supplement at a time.
Okay.
Right? And the reason why that would be important is because, as with anything, you think of these supplements from Chi Enterprise as an extension of a food source, right? And anybody can have a reaction to any one particular food. And like I remember there was one time in the past when I was doing a different program on inflammation, and in that program there was something called a GI synergy, which is a combination of different capsules that have an anti-parasitic, anti-yeast, and an antifungal effect. And one person had a reaction to just one of the capsules in that little bag. So she was able to recognize which color capsule it was. She took it out, but then all the rest of them were fine. Nobody else had that issue, but you can be the one person who has an issue with just one ingredient in one of the supplements. So when you break it down and take them slower and one at a time, and then work your way up, then you
Okay.
can define, and it might just be that your dose needs to be different, or there could be one
Yeah.
that you're reacting to.
And I had burning in the esophagus too,
Okay, yeah.
last night after taking,
Okay, so,
Yeah.
and for some people, it's just even too much, too quick.
yeah.
There's, I typically will not necessarily always 100% of everything Dr. Shi recommends, but I take most of them. But my system takes it very easily, so I can put all of them in my handful and just take them and drink them down, and there's never an issue at all. But that's not like that for everybody. And that's never really. This is the opportunity to explain these things, because otherwise, you think about it. If you had nowhere to go and you did that, you would basically more than likely just trash all the supplements and be out the money and never get the benefit, when you really still could get a significant benefit
Yeah.
from them, just doing it differently.
Yeah, okay, thank
Okay.
you.
You're welcome.
And then you also mentioned about how long we should wait before a meal or after a meal and taking the
Okay, great question. This is going to be important for everybody, because this comes up all the time, is how long do you wait when the instructions say before or after a meal? And to preface that, I'll say that there's 3 things that Dr. Chi will write on there. He'll have 2 numbers, so it'll be like a 2 times 2, and then it'll either say A, B, or C after that. A means you take it after a meal, B is before a meal, and C means you can take it anytime. You can take it before a meal, after a meal, or in between meals. But when you're talking about before or after, the optimal of that is about 10 minutes before or 10 minutes after.
Okay,
Right? If it comes down to where you've forgotten and you're going to take it right before you eat, that's not earth-shattering, but if you want to optimize it, it could be 10 minutes and really up to 20 minutes. So that's that would be optimizing the use of the supplement.
okay, thank you.
Good question.
All supplements?
Not all. Some supplements are best taken with food. Like as an example, if I have somebody on a digestive protocol where they're on a pre-probiotic and enzyme, let's say maybe even a stomach acid because they have really poor protein breakdown and all these food sensitivities, I will have them take the probiotic before the meal, preferably about 10 minutes before, the enzyme after their first bite of food, and the stomach acid when there's 1 bite of food left. Because that's how to optimize it, because you're really trying to replicate what the body would be doing naturally. But then as an example, if I have somebody on an adrenal protocol and they're using the Prime Adrenal Support, which is vitamin B5, and the Prime Energy Support, which is a comprehensive combination to help support the adrenals, the energy support is best taken about 10 minutes before, and the B5, the Prime Adrenal Support, is best taken with the meal. Because it's like when you're taking something that is a nutrient that would normally be in your food, it's best to take it with your food. If you're taking something that's, again, it's a little bit different with the Chi Enterprise herbs, because most of them are a combination of Chinese herbs, and it's not really about like comparing it to eating a food. It's about more of like having basically like a therapeutic effect on the body. So, great question. All right, any other questions about prioritizing or? Okay, excellent. Well,
I
and
wanted to know the price of some of these tests, like the pathogen test or the S1VO test.
okay, all right. So, to the best of my recollection, because I don't normally take care of the pricing part, and the adrenal test kit, I know the regular one that we use, the 205E, is $228, and I think the 205E plus esterone is about $40 more, $268, $269, something like that. The pathogen test is, I believe, $298, so somewhere right around $300. The SIBO test is about a $200 test, and if anybody needs, because if anybody's going to do blood testing, I just usually recommend, if you have a conventional doctor who's covered by insurance, just go there. Just go, if you get it covered. But there's a lot of people who don't have insurance for that also. And if that's the case, let me know, because I actually have a company that I work with that is a discount company that I can get you to link to whatever test, and you can order it online. You get the same requisition form as you would from a doctor, and then you bring it right into a LabCorp lab, and they do the blood draw, and they send you the test directly back to you. So and it's significantly discounted compared to what you would pay anywhere else. So that's another option for everybody. And so basically, it's just really about taking your recommendations to the next level. And so whether that be testing, whether it be, understanding some of the underlying issues, and to me, that's the best utilization. Like Dr. Shi, as I said, he's a master at what he does. He's such a gift to every one of us. Even the time when he said, "You're going to have a stroke," to me, it's still such a gift because it gives us an understanding of what we need to look at and what we need to do. But to me, to utilize those recommendations to its fullest is to define the things that are causing it, and not just think that the supplement itself is the answer. Yeah, because a lot of times when routinely, I'll see people overcome their poor peripheral circulation much quicker than a year or two, which is generally on there. But it's not because Dr. Chi is recommending too long. It's just that if all you're going to do is use vein light for that, it's going to take you a year or two. But if you're doing other things to heal the whole gut-brain connection, and you're taking care of what's going on nutritionally, and you're supporting the brain on other levels, that you can overcome that. Maybe instead of a year or two, maybe 6 months or 12 months. To me, why not try to get things moving as quick as possible? So any last questions before we finish up tonight? Okay, well, I'd like to first thank you for everybody for whether you attended the Chi lecture or saw him live. I mean, and I say, thank you and congratulations, because it shows that you have this somewhat of a significant, focus on your own health and wellness, and it's, I don't know, I just, to me, it's such a passion for me that I think everybody should have that focus, but not everybody does. So I congratulate everybody for that, and thank you all for coming tonight, because those of you that are here live and with the questions and the interaction, this provides a lot of benefit for everybody who's listening to this recording. There were so many people wanting to be here, couldn't be here live, so I'll thank you for them also. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.